So we have started the recording. Did you guys? Yep, there we go. So let's see. Yep, I'm just going to do a dismiss. So welcome to this webinar, guys. Ask us anything about Azure Stack HCI and Azure Arc. And with me, I actually have a few MVPs today. And I'd like to have them just do a quick introduction of themselves. And we are going to start with Ben.
Of course, we'll go in age order then, right? Yeah, so hey, I'm Ben Thomas. I'm down at the bottom of the world in New Zealand, not an Australian state, no matter what apps will try and tell you. But yeah, so I've been working with Storage Spaces Direct, now Azure Stack HCI, for probably 6 years, almost 5-6 years, and more recently with Azure Arc for probably 12 plus months. Yeah, I work for a large MSP across New Zealand and Australia, so it gets me a good amount of exposure to different use cases for customers, as well as hosting environments. So I've played with quite a bit of tech over the way, and not just from Microsoft, or almost every vendor. So I think I have a pretty good view of the landscape.
Yep. Thank you, Ben. Next one is Darryl.
Yay. Am I unmuted? Yes. I'm Darryl. I'm from the Netherlands. Same story as Ben, I think. Focused on Stack HCI, doing it from a couple of years now. First on, first Storage Space Direct, of course. Running the Stack HCI Slack. If you haven't signed up, please go and sign up. I must remember the link correctly, aka.ms/HCI-Slack. Wow. Okay. Yeah, curious on the burning questions.
Yep. Thank you, Darryl. Next one is Daniel.
Ah, there's that mute button. Hi, I'm Daniel Apps. I'm formerly CDM, now Azure MVP in Sydney, Australia. It's one of the parent states of New Zealand. Ben just doesn't accept his reality. It's typical of New Zealand. But yeah, I'm a hybrid cloud practice lead for a MSP a service provider here in Sydney for about 12 years, working on Storage Spaces Direct and all things, sort of Hyper-V and all the bits and pieces that went into Azure Stack HCI, and obviously more recently is Azure Arc. Yeah, so a journey started with Hyper-V and Azure Stack Storage Spaces Direct a few years ago, helping service providers and enterprises discover the joys that is Storage Spaces Direct. It's one of my favorite things. You can probably tell by my jumper, supplied by Darryl van der Peijl. Enable cluster S2D, my favorite PowerShell command out there. Still will not use the UI. It was always PowerShell to death. But yeah, very much an advocate for Azure Stack HCI and the magic that goes underneath.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. And Kenny.
Cool. So I guess we weren't going in age order then, seeing as Daniel went last there. My name is Kenny Lowe. I'm based in Scotland, which is the New Zealand of the Northern Hemisphere, I guess, or maybe New Zealand's the Scotland of the Southern, whichever way you want to flip it. I'm a 5-time Microsoft MVP. I used to be vaguely technical, but now I'm a senior manager at Dell, and I spend my time signing off holidays and expenses for a lot more talented and enthusiastic folks in the Microsoft Hybrid Cloud ecosystem. We're basically a team of engineering evangelists who are here to make sure everyone understands and can get the most of the Microsoft Hybrid Cloud ecosystem.
Awesome. Thank you. And myself is Jan-Tore Pedersen. I'm also a Cloud and Data Center MVP. I'm located in Norway, cold North Norway. And yes, I've been a MVP for about two years now. And I focus mainly on Azure Stack HCI and Azure at the moment. My background is like, I think most of the guys here that has worked with Windows products for a long time, that we touched everything. And I'm also, like all the others here, speaker and a blogger. So yeah. And sadly, we were supposed to have Dave Kawula as well with us today from Canada, but his daughter had an accident, so they are driving home from the hospital right now. So unfortunately, he's not available. So it's going to be us 5 today. This session is recorded and will be on the Festive Tech YouTube channel in a couple of days, hopefully. So let's start with the questions. So guys, you can ask the questions in the chat, and I do have some pre-prepared questions as well. So I'm actually going to ask the first question. So the first question is, when should I use Azure Stack HCI and not Windows Server? So guys, you want to answer that question? If you're not raising your hands, I'll pick one. Kenny.
Sure. I mean, my answer is simple and straightforward. If you can use Azure Stack HCI OS, then my view is that you should, because that is the direction of travel for Microsoft and for their OEM partners. That is where the innovation is going to go. That is where new features are going to come over time. But the reality is that not everyone can use the Azure Stack HCI OS just now. Hosters have a hard time of it for some licensing reasons. People who are in disconnected states can't use it. So good news is you're not left completely out of the ecosystem. Windows Server HCI, as we now call it, is still there, and its heart is beating strong. But my personal strong view is that if you can use the HCI OS, you should.
Yeah. Yep. So why? Yeah, Ben. No, Daniel. I mean.
Yeah, I'll just tap in on that as well. To extend on there is so over the past few years, been working with some enterprises across Australia. So if anybody doesn't know what Australia is like, it's the size of the US with about enough people to fit in Dublin Island. So we're very sparse. So that presents our organisations some geographical challenges. So working with some customers across the country that are deploying hyperconverged or virtualization estates, around the country. They've been working on those projects for several years, and for anybody that's sort of been following the Azure Stack HCI ecosystem, the underlying technology, Windows Server with storage spaces direct and Hyper-V and sometimes software-defined networking, if you're into that, has been around for many years. So they've actually been working on projects for a long time. So they're kind of a slow burn to get these things out there. Whilst they're very interested into using Azure Stack HCI, sometimes it's just a matter of a budgeting constraint, because it's a change in the ecosystem. There's obviously a different landscape as far as security goes. Whilst the workloads are still working where they are, there is a cloud touch, I guess, if you will. And it's also about just the current tool set and skill set. Even though the Azure Stack HCI, a lot of the same skill sets are transferable, sometimes it's not all of it is. And a lot of the tool set is transferable, but again, not all of it is completely. So I guess, from that perspective, it's if you've got an existing estate, existing skill set, existing reasons, then sometimes Windows Server might be the way to go for now.
Yeah, and there are some. There was a question about what kind of features are, let's say, what is identical going from 2019 to 2022 and Azure Stack HCI? Are we getting any benefits from HCI to 2022? Who want to answer? Anybody wants to answer that?
Yeah, so the big one for me is Azure Stack HCI comes with thin provisioning of S2D volumes, which isn't available in Windows Server 2022. So that's the ability to now provision disks on top of your storage pool and only consume the storage required for the VMs actually running. It's a traditional SAN feature that everyone from that background will be used to. But it's something that's come across just with Azure Stack HCI 21H2 to do that. So that's great, because it means things like rebuilds a lot faster because there's no large empty volumes to calculate across. It means if you need to pivot part way and maybe you started off with a mirror accelerator parity setup and you're actually finding you just want to go to straight mirror instead for performance, then you potentially have the free space still to provision new volumes of identical sizes and move across without having to worry about the challenges previously about leaving enough spare space for volume changes in future. So that's a huge feature that comes exclusively to Azure Stack HCI for me.
Yeah, but this feature also, it's been in other platforms for a long time, and might have caused headaches for some. But how do you, if you're going to be using it, how will you monitor to make sure you don't exceed the volume or the storage?
Well, I think it's not a new challenge. With VM provisioning, you can go with thick or thin provisioned VHDs. So there's always a trade-off with management overhead. I guess it comes down to you're either managing your pool space as a whole or managing those individual volumes. I prefer the flexibility of being able to change my volumes over time without being constrained to having thick provision volumes. It just means I've got to make sure I am monitoring that total pool storage over time, and I don't get past the amount of space I need to be able to do things like repairs and stuff. So yes, you do have to now monitor your total pool storage more closely, but you get some extra flexibility as a result. Mm-hmm. So I think it's worth the trade-off.
Yeah. And going on that, we have a question here. It says, can I manage my Azure Stack HCI cluster in Azure?
Wait, can I take a step back?
Yeah, sure.
So the first question was like, why would you choose Windows Server HCI over Azure Stack HCI or the other way around, right? So Ben touched one feature, so team provisioning. I think another one is faster repairs, right? There was a lot of unclarity of that faster repairs was coming to Windows Server HCI or not. My latest knowledge is that we got it in there. And I think that's also a feature that makes sense for a lot of people because repairs were very slow, especially if you're using HDDs or parity in the mix, right? So that's a top priority feature for me to choose Windows Server 2022 over 2019, for example. But if we're taking another step back and try to answer the question, why choose Azure Stack HCI over Windows Server HCI? I think it's becoming a very interesting discussion, and not from a technical standpoint, but more from a functionality standpoint, right? So we're talking about technical stuff, team provisioning, faster repairs, but the whole functionality in the ecosystem is being enabled in Azure Stack HCI and not on Windows Server is what brings the most out of the product.
Yeah, which is also the next question.
Cool.
And let's just say I have a client with when it comes to faster repairs. I'm actually going to help a client this week and patch the cluster that is doing 1.2 million IOPS peaks and is averaging close to 600,000 IOPS during a workday. And we're going to be patching that this weekend online. And you spend about 12 hours per node rebuilding after reboots, just for OS patching. So the faster rebuilds will be insane because we are going from 1 gigabyte that has to be resynced for each byte that is changed within a slab to 256 kilobytes, which is 4,096 times smaller, I think it is. So yeah, so that's, and going on the ecosystem, there was a question about managing Azure Stack HCI in Azure. And the question is, yes, of course you can. But what else can you do in Azure with your Azure Stack HCI cluster?
Well, and I'm just going to jump on there. There's a bunch of stuff to talk about there. I'm actually going to tie that into the previous question, which is why would you pick Azure Stack HCI versus Windows Server HCI just now? And actually, one of the really compelling things for me just now is something that was announced at Ignite and spoken about there, which is the Azure Attestation service. for Azure Stack HCI, basically the enabling of Azure to see VMs and services running inside Azure Stack HCI as part of Azure. So that opens up a whole host of capabilities and potential future, and some now capabilities. So for example, Azure Virtual Desktop takes a dependency on Azure Attestation for enabling the VMs there and activating the VMs that run within it. So that is something which really opens up a whole host of opportunities that won't be available on the Windows Server HCI platform. Azure Stack HCI actually being effectively a part of Azure or an extension of Azure there. In terms of what you can manage from Azure just now, it's slim pickings, I think is a fair thing to say. There are a few things, but the vast majority of your admin time is going to be spent in Windows Admin Center or potentially PowerShell or other MMC tools today. A lot of the Azure Stack HCI stuff that we talk about is aspirational and stuff that's coming and will be there in the future. But what I always come back to is the fact that things in the future in the past were on a 3-year release cycle. So when Microsoft spoke about what's coming next, it was like next 3 years, next 3 years. Now we have multiple updates per year. It's a much faster cadence. So speaking about what's coming next is actually a much more tangible proposition than we've had in the past. A bit more real for me.
Yep. Anybody else want to shoot in? So one of the really cool things, I think, as I'm working a lot with Azure these days as well, is the monitoring capabilities with Azure Stack HCI. And this comes back to like monitoring your storage when it comes to thin provisioning. You can now get better monitoring and actually get alerts from Azure. And you can actually do a lot of, automation as well with Azure to remediate stuff with your Azure Stack HCI. And they showed at Ignite the new multi-cluster monitoring solution for Azure Stack HCI, which is looking really good. It is a lot better than what SCOM has ever been able to do. And it takes the benefits of Azure Monitor, which is being heavily developed and giving you a lot of a lot of new features you've never had before on-prem. Mm-hmm. And also, I'm liking the fact that we now can run the new Windows Server 2022 Azure Edition, which has auto-manage and hot patching, which is really cool, that you can actually auto-manage your servers, your on-prem servers, and automatically add them to Azure policies, backup, updating, change control, and so on. So the change tracking, and there's a lot of other features as well. So which is really what I'm actually trying to sell to my clients is all of these features on how you can manage your on-prem servers as they are in Azure. And if you've had to do this with a Windows Server with Azure Arc, in Azure Stack HCI, most of these features are free, but with Azure, with Windows Server and Azure Arc, it's a $15 per month per VM to do this. So there is quite a lot of cool features that you can use, and I'm starting to get a little bit fond of Azure policies. So it's I'm looking forward to using it a lot more.
And you're touching on something which is one of the things that really excites me about this sort of decoupling of Azure from Azure, which is Azure as your control plane, Azure as your monitoring plane, Azure as XYZ, and then run your workloads where you want and need to run them. So you said that Azure Monitor is delivering a lot more than SCOM did in the past, for example. The other thing it's delivering is that you don't need to run SCOM and manage the SQL unders and license that. It's just there for you to use. So having that sort of ubiquitous plane there in Azure when you can use it, not always, is a really powerful thing for this platform.
Yep. There was a question here about licensing. So how do I license Azure Stack HCI and my workloads on the cluster? So who wants to tackle that one?
It's one of the most common things that we get asked, because there are two schools of thought here. There are those who have used Hyper-V in the past and those who haven't, and they're starting to look at Azure Stack HCI. People who have used Hyper-V in the past and Storage Spaces Direct and things like that are used to getting a bunch of this stuff effectively for free. So they're used to paying the Windows Server data center license to license all the VM workloads and getting all of the software-defined stuff underneath for nothing. And that's the model that's come before. Anyone else that's used any other platform, be it Nutanix or VMware or whatever, is used to licensing those capabilities, then paying for the workloads on top. So they don't care that actually Azure Stack HCI OS has a license. Actually, they're typically super positive about it because you pay $10 per physical core per month and you get everything. There isn't an incremental cost for enabling software-defined networking. There isn't an incremental cost per terabyte of storage. It's an all-in, all-inclusive $10 US per core per month. Really competitive against the rest of the market. Not nice if you're historically a Hyper-V customer, is what I would say.
Yeah, and there is one thing you actually can think about as well to cut cost here, because I was talking with a client about this, is that Azure Stack HCI honors if you disable cores in the BIOS. So if you have a 16-core, two 16-core CPUs, and you limit it to 6 cores per CPU, you're only actually paying for 12, even though you have 32. And that goes with any licensing that is Azure enabled for Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah,
so
I promised myself that I would be independent and OEM agnostic in this, but I have to say that Dell have created a plugin for Windows Admin Center to do that CPU cost management. So you can say, I only want to have 8 cores active in each node in my cluster, and tell it to go and do it, and it will go and make that so with no workload downtime in a cluster-aware manner. So even some OEMs are recognizing that this cost management of physical cores for the Azure Stack HCI license is important for customers.
Yeah, and it's awesome because that allows you, let's say you have a 5-year span and you know you'll be using it more and more and more, then you can start off with instead of having to buy a small CPU and then running out of CPU, you can actually buy a bigger one and then just limit the number of cores you have.
And that's not getting around the rules, by the way. That is supported by Microsoft. But it doesn't impact things like SQL Server licensing, things like that. If that's licensed per physical core, you still have to pay for everything under that. It's just the Azure Stack HCI OS license.
It depends, but we're coming back to that. So yeah,
I think we have to separate the license cost, right? So we're talking about license cost like the base OS license cost, which is a $10 per physical core per month. But still, we also have, I saw a question in the chat from Bronson, I believe, about Azure Virtual Desktop costs. And those costs are, added on top of that $10 per month. So every service that is enabled on top of Azure Stack HCI OS, you're going to pay for it, right? In some way. We're not entirely sure how and when, but
it's a choice and it's a workload. So you always pay for the workloads on top, unless it's like a free Linux VM running on there, whatever workload. You're going to buy some Citrix, you're going to license it. You want AVD, you're going to license it. Yeah. So the only thing I'm comparing here is you buy the hardware, you license the software-defined infrastructure, then it's a workload discussion after that. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And Microsoft also announced at Ignite a new licensing for Windows servers on top of Azure Stack HCI via Azure. So you can soon you can actually license your VMs via Azure. We don't know the cost yet. They haven't actually said it, but it's going to be, at one point it's going to be cheaper, at one point it's going to be more expensive, depending on the data center licenses you're running. So, but if you're running a mixed environment, it might be cheaper, it might not. So we have a question here from the chat. It's from Hamish. In terms of backup products for Azure Stack HCI, is there any one partner solution that is recommended from an integration viewpoint than others? So anybody want to answer that one?
I did an initial reply in the chat, but I mean, at a high level, like any new hypervisor or OS, the backup vendors do need to, put the time and effort in themselves to certify against that. So I think immediately it's working with your vendors to see whether or not they support the various versions of Azure Stack HCI, because remember there is a new version at a pretty regular cadence. So I put an example of Veeam, who I'm familiar with, who have an article explicitly saying what versions they support. But I think more so over time, as more management functionality moves into the Azure ARM interface for Azure Stack HCI and the machines on top of it and the functions on top of it, it'll be interesting to see which vendors actually start to take advantage of that and maybe start to be able to use Azure tags and ARM to decide which VMs to back up from your on-prem Azure Stack HCI. I don't know of any vendors looking into this at the moment, but I think that's where we'll start to see some differentiation over time as backup vendors actually integrating with the Azure presence of Azure Stack HCI rather than just directly with the boxes on-prem.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a good thing, a good idea, because we have that in Virtual Machine Manager with a lot of the vendors today, where they can use attributes to use different type of backup jobs can be used on the tags in VMM. So that would be actually really nice to get. And as far as I know, Commvault is also certified and works with Azure Stack HCI. And I think there is on the Azure Stack HCI webpage, I think there is a list of certified. They're working on a certified list for backup vendors, and you will also see the same thing when it comes to antivirus vendors as well. As there is a little bit. This was a chat we've had before about certified backup vendors, and I think most of us are the preferred vendor is Microsoft. I know some use others, but I don't know what you guys think. What do you use on and recommend as antivirus?
Defender.
Yeah.
My recommendation is, and I'll probably ruffle a few feathers here, is do not put anything on the OS that unless you absolutely need to. And if you think you need to, you're wrong. And it doesn't matter what your security team tell them to go put the tinfoil hats on and go talk to somebody else. Treat it as an appliance. Anything that interacts with the operating system of Azure Stack HCI or any virtualization, especially Microsoft virtualization, is not going to give you, or is potentially going to give you a negative experience. The Defender toolset out of the box puts its own exceptions and is actually built for the platform. It is built for Windows OS is built for Azure Stack HCI. There is no need to go beyond that. And that's my recommendation. But it heads many times over the years around that. But that's your nirvana, and that's where you should be aiming for.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else? No. Then I have another question here. So there's a question here about live migration. Can I live migrate my workloads from any Windows server with Hyper-V to Azure Stack HCI? I see Kenny is smiling. Ben is as well. Ben, you want to answer?
Yeah, so the short answer is no, you can't use the live migration function to move workloads from an existing Hyper-V deployment to Azure Stack HCI. That doesn't mean you can't get an almost live experience. So there are certain data protection vendors out there that have the ability to replicate workloads between Hyper-V and Azure Stack HCI, which enables you to fail over between them. But the native live migration functionality in Hyper-V can't migrate to an Azure Stack HCI host. But in the same way that you can't live migrate from an on-prem Hyper-V into Azure itself.
Yeah.
But we had Ask Me Anything 2 weeks ago with Cosmos Darwin, who's the program manager for Azure Stack HCI. And he told us that they're going to put a lot of focus on migration scenarios for Azure Stack HCI, right? So something is cooking. We don't know what yet, but it will probably be better. Right?
Yeah,
so,
and the same thing with Hyper-V replica as well. It doesn't work. You cannot set up Hyper-V replica between a Windows server and Azure Stack HCI. That doesn't work either. But offline migration, you can shut down the VM and do an offline migration. That works. So yeah.
So what would be the best way to migrate now from Windows Server to Azure Stack HCI OS? Can you point to specific vendors or?
I would say any vendor that has replica option with almost zero downtime, where it can sync the initial data and do when you failover, it does a shutdown of the VM, sync the data, and then starts the VM and minimizes the downtime. Most of the vendors can do it in 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the size and change of the VM. So yeah, Veeam can do it, Commvault can do it. Some of the migration tools like Certo and I don't remember, but most of them can do it. Carlos asked if we can use VMM. Yes, if VMM supports the Azure Stack HCI OS version, then yes, it can do an offline migration, but that's it. Nothing with shared, nothing live migration doesn't work as of now.
I'm talking, but I was on mute. The reality is that Microsoft don't enable this scenario. They don't support this scenario. Migration from Windows Server HCI to Azure Stack HCI is off the books as far as they're concerned. And there are legalities behind it, and it's not a technical thing that stops them. It's they don't support it for other reasons, but there are many ways that you can enable it. There are many ways that you can play with the tools that are there to make it possible. So Microsoft would say, no, you can't. There are plenty of ways that you can move workloads from one to the other, which aren't blocked at this time.
Yeah, we actually have a stretch clustering question. I don't know who is giving me the feedback. No, it's gone now. I'm thinking about creating a stretch cluster. How small can I run it, or how large? And can I run it over 300 miles distance? So you want to answer that question?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, smallest size is 2 nodes at each site for a 4-node overall size. And yes, you can. It's probably going to be an asynchronous setup there, but absolutely, yes, you can.
Yep. And
I think the reason to have a minimum of 2 nodes is because of the storage pool that needs to be created, of course, to have resiliency there. So you always need 2 nodes.
2 nodes per location. So it needs to be 4. Yeah. And if you want to have synchronous sync stretch cluster, it needs to be less than 30 kilometers, right? I think it is.
I think there's no specific hard and fast rule. There's recommendation and guidance, but do testing and see what actually works for you in practice.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
response times, latency is going to be your enemy there.
Yeah, latency and speed. You should at least have 10 gigabits or more between the 2 data centers for sure. Yeah, and actually I'm talking with a client about stretch clustering right now, and it's actually a lot of people I speak with have actually missed this for Hyper-V. So it's going to be an awesome feature that we're going to be seeing more and more of, and more people starting to use. So I'm looking forward to start working with clients with stretch clustering and seeing the features they actually get with this. And I'd actually love the possibility to fail over workloads to the other side, patch the nodes on one side, then fail back, and then do the other side as well. So it's going to be pretty cool.
Is stretch clustering going to be enabled for Windows Server HCI?
No.
Okay, you just want to make that sure that's out there.
Yeah, right. So only Azure Stack HCI.
And to break in more, we missed a question from Bronson. He asked, do any of the approved OEMs sell cluster nodes with Azure Stack HCI compatible Radeon GPUs as of yet? I have no clue, to be honest.
Lenovo does not.
No, and there are good reasons for it, and one can, all will, I think, is the short answer. If you want Radeon GPUs just now, Azure Stack Hub supports the MI25, so you can absolutely get the MI25 on Azure Stack Hub and do GPU partitioning on that right now on premises. But Azure Stack HCI, not yet.
No, and I'm probably not going to come until we get GPU partitioning right in Azure Stack HCI. I'm thinking, and with the shortage of semiconductors these days, it's going to be hard getting GPUs anyway. So there is a question here about can I run Azure Stack HCI on any hardware, and if not, why not?
I'm going to take that. So the short answer is
impartial, Ken.
So the very short answer is no, you can't run it on any hardware. The shorter answer is yes, you can run it on any hardware which is on the HCL and meets the minimum prereqs, and you can go and deploy it and install it on that. The longer answer is what should you do versus what you can do. And the first thing I would always recommend that you go and do is look at the Azure Stack HCI catalogs. What's that? AKA.ms. I type AKS way too much today. AKA.ms/Azure Stack HCI catalog. Let's pop that in there. Then you click on that, and the first thing you do is you go to catalog within there. So click on the link there. I encourage everyone to do this right now, and hopefully I've typed the right one in there. You click on catalog and you read the very first thing at the top that Microsoft put in bold at the top of their HCI catalog, which is Microsoft strongly recommends, and I'm doing this from memory because my machine's being slow and it's not loaded, Microsoft strongly recommends using integrated systems for this. This is an indication of the direction of travel for the product. It's an indication of where you will get the best support experience, the best deployment experience, and the best long-term experience. My experience and the experience of several people here, I think, on this call in working with Windows Server 2012 and 2016 is the DIY approach is not the most joyous thing to do. Maybe you can get things deployed and working on day 1, but what about day 10, day 100, day 1000, because that's only 3 years or so. How do you keep this thing up to date and working in the long term? Integrated systems give you the best experience. Down a level from that, there are validated nodes. Microsoft described what both of these things are on this catalog, by the way. So if you go to any integrated system and scroll down and click on the integrated system tab, it gives a big long list of the reasons why you should use integrated systems. There is no such list in the validated nodes because the validated nodes are just, yeah, it'll work. Yeah, we've checked that the OS will install. Integrated systems give a huge array of additional value adds, and there are a few OEMs which deliver integrated systems, so I'm plugging all of them while I say this as well.
Just to add on to that as well, thanks for that very impartial view there, Mr. Dill. Oh, sorry, Kenny Lowe.
It's the Microsoft view. I wasn't giving my view. I was literally Microsoft's words.
Just to add on to that, so to circle back to one of the questions that we, the first question I think it was, is should you do Azure Stack HCI or Windows Server? That's actually a very important reason. If you have an existing virtualization estate or existing hardware and you're wanting to dabble and you want to come from another world or whatever it is, refresh and dabble in the world of Microsoft virtualization or just update, then probably a Windows Server is more for you. If you are going to acquire new hardware from one of the very many OEMs that support integrated systems, then that's another reason why you would get Azure Stack HCI versus Windows Server. So don't Frankenstein stuff together to build Azure Stack HCI.
I think that support statement's a good one as well. Having run HCI clusters in all flavors for a while now, the when things aren't going well, being able to call up your vendor and get a full end-to-end experience both from your vendor and Microsoft when it comes to troubleshooting. You're not being questioned on why you've got your NIC configured a certain way or a switch configured a certain way, will just massively reduce the troubleshooting time between all parties involved. So that alone can be gold. The other one that we haven't touched on is actually with Azure Stack HCI, your support is through Azure compared to Windows Server, where you either basically need a Premier support contract to get good engineers to answer the phone when you have a problem with Azure with Windows Server HCI. Azure Stack HCI, you go through the Azure support portal and you get to a dedicated team of engineers who look after Azure Stack HCI. So that's a big win, a reason to use Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah, even though I'm pretty partial here, I've actually tested it because I had a bug upgrading from the 21H2 to the 22H2 preview. And the response times from the Azure support, even with the cheapest support agreement, was incredible. It took 2 hours from I created a support ticket until they responded, and they worked tirelessly on this. But unfortunately, this was a not known bug, so we couldn't fix it. But it's in the pipeline for being fixed. But it's really awesome, the new Azure support. So that's actually one of the main selling points for me as well, is you're saving $100,000 a year on Premier support if you're only using Premier support for your Windows Server Hyper-V environment today. And that's worth a lot of money for me, at least. So, and that goes on, again, on the Azure ecosystem of benefits you're getting from the Azure Stack HCI OS. So we got a question here from Bronson. He's being active today. He's asking about TPM and host guarding service and shielded VMs and so on Azure Stack HCI. I know there, Darryl, that was actually talked about in your webinar with Cosmos about this. Do you remember what Cosmos talked about this?
Yeah, and they have not been sharing a lot on that topic, to be honest. Right, you can do the TPM, of course, but shielded VM is not being mentioned in the whole Azure Stack HCI story. At least I didn't see it. But I also see Jaromir pointing out some good stuff in the chat about confidential computing. I think there was an announcement on Ignite. Not if I'm reaching my NDA. Okay.
I'm
sure.
in the same situation as you. I'm Googling furiously to see if I'm breaching an NDA, to see if something's been published. Certainly some aspects of shielded VMs have been deprecated, and that is publicly announced. Whether everything has, I'm not certain if that's announced or is even going to be a thing. In terms of the direction of travel, though, the direction of travel for Azure Stack HCI OS is going to be in line with Azure. Azure doesn't support shielded VMs, so I think that gives an answer as to what will come in Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah, so, and we do have the secured core for Azure Stack HCI that will secure the OS system and secure the hypervisor. But you have the new secure VMs in Azure, and the path will most likely be you have this new shielded type VM in Azure. And I think Cosmos mentioned that they are working on something in your webinar, Darryl, that the host guarding service today does not work with Azure Stack HCI because you need the OS as well to be supported with host guarding service. But shielded VMs will never come.
Which is sad, by the way. Shielded VMs were near and dear to my heart. I was involved in, actually responsible for architecting the first production deployment of shielded VMs out in the wild. I spoke about it at Ignite. It's the first time that Bronson, I think, encountered me in the wild. There's a whole host of stories about shielded VMs which are being kicked to the dirt, but hey ho, that's Azure.
Yeah, but I'm guessing they will come with something, and they've announced something for Azure, so it will definitely come for Azure Stack HCI as well. It's for government and financial information and health information or personal, anything that has to do with GDPR, personal information needs to be running on a shielded VM, to be honest. Awesome.
I think we should take a look at Azure, what Azure is doing on that stuff, and probably make some sense what's coming to Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah, exactly. And we have the TPM attestation for virtual machines on HCI right now, so that's pretty good. I have a question. We've kind of answered a little bit about it, but if I have any issues with my cluster, where can I get help? The first answer is, of course, Azure support. The other answer is, of course, the Slack channel, our Azure Stack HCI Slack channel. There will be a link.
That's the wrong order.
Yeah, that's definitely the wrong order. Go to Slack first.
Yeah, so the Slack channel first, then okay, yeah. And then Azure support, of course.
And there is another third option, which is if you have an integrated system from one of the supported vendors who do integrated systems, one of the prerequisites for OEMs to be in that integrated system program is for them to have a joint support agreement with Microsoft where they do automated case exchange behind the scenes with Microsoft. So if you go to their OEM, they will never say, no, that's a Microsoft problem. They will manage that behind the scenes for you with Microsoft. So it's...
Yeah, and we've been delivering the MX certified nodes for Windows Server from Lenovo since the beginning, and they've been doing this for a while as well. And Dell does the same thing, and I think HP and so on does the same thing. No, okay, he's shaking his head. But that actually works very, very well because it's a single point of contact. If you have any issues, Dell or Lenovo or whoever OEM
Dell, Lenovo, Data On.
Yeah, they will use their contract with Microsoft to figure out if it's a hardware issue or if it's a software issue. And if it's a software issue, they will open a ticket. It will be an escalated ticket. It will get their own manager on it, an escalation engineer, and all that. So that is actually worth the extra price increase as well, along with the Azure support. So, and you don't have to.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you don't have to have the arguing between the OEM and Microsoft say, no, it's the other one's fault.
You go, Darryl, because I want to jump in there as well, but you go.
Oh, thank you, Kenny. So I don't think we touched the difference between a validated system and an integrated system specifically. So one thing is the support, and other things. I'm looking at you firstly, Kenny.
It's
yeah, I mean it's super simple. Again, go to the Azure Stack HCI catalog, go to one of the integrated systems. I will pop a link in the chat here, and if you scroll down, oh, that's a 14th generation. I'll pop current generation one in the chat. If you scroll down to the bottom there of this page, which I'm just popping in the chat now, and you click on the thing that says integrated system, there's a paragraph followed by a list of bullet points. Those bullet points are unique to the integrated systems. If you click on any validated node in the HCI catalog, you see none of this. So this is Microsoft Words, not mine. So I like to share this because it's what Microsoft say the difference between integrated systems and validated nodes are. I would say a whole bunch more. But this is the bare minimum difference. All the things that you get from an integrated system versus buying a validated node, which is basically just, will it install? Yes, we validated it. It's a whole bunch more commitments the OEMs have to make for a multi-year lifecycle management experience there.
Yeah, and it's I'm just showing it now in the screen. It's audible multi-node solution, pre-installation of Azure Stack HCI operating system, highest component SLA only through ongoing joint review process, secured server platform, which is in development, full stack updates of firmware driver recipe management and one-click rollout, joint ongoing testing and validation by the solution builder and Microsoft, joint support agreements between the solution builder and Microsoft. So the certified system will run Azure Stack HCI. You have to install it yourself, but you're not going to get these things here, which is not what you're going to get.
Sorry.
The full stack update is also very important for me as I advise customers, right? So we know the concept from Azure Stack Hub, so you get a package with everything in it. And also with HCI, you get the integration with Windows Admin Center to do a full update of your cluster automatically, right? And it provides drivers and firmware. So that's a really nice experience that you get with a integrated system, not a validated system.
Exactly. And if there was a question about, there's also a massive, there was also commentary, also massive reduction of vendors and solutions if you select it. Yes, and this is also true with other HCI solutions as well. With VMware vSAN, it's very limited. Nutanix, it's quite limited as well. So, and you can run it on any hardware, but you cannot buy it on any hardware.
Carlos asked a question, sorry to cut in there just before I lose it. Carlos asked a question specifically to me, which I want to capture because you said VMware and vSAN there, and actually it's very relevant. So the question is, when will Dell have validated systems? Dell have been running HCI systems for a long time. Dell is the market leader in HCI, specifically because of VxRail. VxRail is the #1 selling HCI platform in the market today, and we have an awful lot of learnings from that. One of those is that we shouldn't have sold VxRail and vSAN ready nodes at the same time, because you're always starting off from a position of, why can't I buy the cheaper one? We had the option of having validated systems and integrated systems when we went with Azure Stack HCI, and we took those learnings, those hard-won learnings, and said integrated systems is the way to go. And maybe we'll lose some deals on cost, but actually the customer experience is what we want to deliver. And that was an intentional choice. It's not because we can't do validated systems. Everything we've done for integrated systems means they are validated, but we've specifically intentionally chosen not to have them listed as validated. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, and I kind of agree a little bit that I know, like Lenovo, they do both certified and validated systems, and for HCI, the reason you want to do the validated system is if you run Windows Server, then you buy the validated system.
Well, no, I would give a different reason, because the integrated systems will support Windows Server as well.
Yep.
The reason to choose a validated system is because you have a JT or a Ben or a Darryl or a Daniel or one of you people out there who are able to do all the stuff which integrated systems solve. The vast majority of customers don't have that though, and we want to make sure that they don't need to have one of you to get the best out of the platform. That's why you go integrated, not validated.
Yep. Good, very good answer. I have another question. We did pick up on this. Can I run Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI? The answer is yes. Why should I do this? Anybody want to answer that?
Because you want to, right? Why should you do it?
Yeah.
Because you want to, yeah. I think Azure Desktop is a very nice use case for Stack HCI. And I don't think we have touched AKS yet, but that's also a very nice use case. So
There's the question.
I think you should even test it to see if it works for your company. It has very nice use cases. You can do cool technical stuff like RDP shortbed to have low latency to your clients, session host, I must say. So yeah, there's a very broad use case for Virtual Desktop, I think.
Yeah, and I've been discussing this with a client as well that is running Citrix, and they want to do more modernized desktops. They want to go Windows 11. They want to have a more unified experience for the users logging in as well when they do either Office 365 or doing that login. So it comes with the Azure front-end login with the MFA and all the features, and you get a good UI. You also can use the Microsoft desktop remote desktop application as well to log in and use, and it works really well. And I'm looking forward to getting it. The licensing costs are not ready yet for the users. It's just the Windows 10 Enterprise as in Azure, but the licensing to run it on the Azure Stack HCI cluster we do not know yet. It's going to be per node. Per cluster. So you're going to have to do the licensing like you do on the Azure Stack HCI OS. That's what we know. We don't know the price yet. So if you reduce the number of cores, you reduce the pricing on the Azure Virtual Desktop again. So it is identical to Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure. It works the same way. It's just running on your hardware in your data center instead, and it's closer to your users. So if your users are local, you will connect to Azure, and with ShorePath, it will connect. The user will connect directly to the session host running in your data center, which is pretty cool. Instead of running it in Azure.
Over the last almost 2 years, Azure Virtual Desktop in Azure has exploded for some strange reason. For some reason, lots of people have needed VDI solutions at short notice, and they've spun them up in Azure and other public cloud environments. And that's worked for a lot of people, but a lot of companies, a lot of customers have found that it doesn't meet their use cases. Sometimes the VDI solution needs to connect to on-premises servers and have low latency there. Sometimes it needs to have low latency to the clients there. Not everything's inside that Microsoft data center there. So the ability to have the AVD service running exactly where you need it, whether it's in the same data center as your other workloads or in the same building as your clients who are connecting to it, is huge for so many people. And as JT says, it's the exact same management experience that's using Azure as that control plane.
Yeah, and one of the things I was talking about for this client was, let's say they exponentially increase number of users on AVD, we can actually just create a new pool in Azure, and just while we're waiting for hardware. And once that hardware is in, we can move them seamlessly over to the on-prem solution as well. There was a question from Bromson. Does Citrix make an MSCS resource for Azure Stack HCI, or is VMM still required to interface between the two? As far as I know, VMM is still required to interface between Hyper-V and Citrix to work the provisioning. So I don't know there is any solution for it. I know Citrix makes a solution for Azure Virtual Desktop, which is incredibly expensive. So yeah, but I'm not a Citrix guy. We have only 2 minutes left, but I'm going to run it a little bit over if that's okay with you guys. If you have to log out, that's fine. But I wanna ask 2 more questions, if that's fine. Yeah, cool. So I have a question about AKS. So we are using AKS today in Azure and AWS, but we want to run AKS on-prem as well. Can I run it on HCI? And what kind of services can I run on AKS? Is there any Azure services I can run?
You can also run it on Outposts, but I don't think that's what we want to hear, right?
No.
Yes, you can run AKS on Azure Stack HCI.
You can run it on Azure Stack Hub too. Just to
Hub.
throw that in there.
Hub doesn't ring a bell. So you can run it. You can manage it from Azure, right? You can deploy stuff from Azure to your cluster. And the beauty of it is that Microsoft enabled all or a couple of cloud services that you can run on top of AKS, such as app services, for example. So you can, do hosting websites, etc., but also enabling Azure Functions, so you can do serverless stuff. And they're going to enable a lot of more use cases on top of AKS or Kubernetes, I must say. So yeah, it's going to be cool. It's cool already, I must say.
Sorry, did you say app service?
App service, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just we can run that on Azure Stack Hub as well and have done for 4 years. But yeah, I'll just mention that. Sorry.
And you update
Darryl, you should look it up.
Was just released about 3 or 4 days ago for Azure Stack Hub, Cloud Cadence and all that.
Isn't Hub the place where you deploy VMs that you run app services on? Is that the managed stuff?
No, that's not true. You don't deploy VMs that you run app service on. You deploy some supporting infrastructure, but not the VMs that app service runs on itself.
Go get him, Kenny. Go get him.
Yeah, and they also just announced key vaults on Azure Stack HCI via Kubernetes as well. Yeah, so that's actually, you can't do that on Hub, right?
Default has been there from day one on Azure Stack Hub.
Oh, they have. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But maybe you have to install a hotfix to enable Windows Server 2022 support, right?
Yeah.
Because it's already GA, but we just enabled it like last week.
So
it's fine. It's all fine.
Yeah. The last question is, what other tools can I use to manage Azure Stack HCI if, let's say, for God forbid, my connection to Azure goes down? Can I use any other tools?
Well, even if your connection to Azure is up, you're not managing much from Azure today. You're using Windows Admin Center or probably PowerShell or some other tooling on premises to do most of your management day-to-day just now, is the short answer.
Yeah, and VMM supports 21H2 in the latest UR, and 21H2, correct. So it's basically Windows Admin Center, PowerShell, and then Virtual Machine Manager to manage it on-prem. And to note, your cluster needs to sync every 30 days, or is it 14 days now? It's something 14, 20, 30 days to report to Azure. If it loses connection for more than that, you cannot provision new VMs to your Azure Stack HCI cluster, which is important. So, yeah.
But it doesn't take down your existing running VMs, so it's not going to like kill your systems.
No, exactly. So it will not take it down. And with Azure Stack HCI, the same points we have been talking about before for Windows Server for storage space direct is still on point. Cache to capacity ratio, I say 20%, some say 10%, depending on if you have slow spinning disks, 20%.
It's the same as the latency question earlier for synchronous replication. There are guidelines, but test your workload. We would say between 10 and 15% fits the vast majority of use cases, but not absolutely everything. If you have a huge amount of cold storage, like hundreds of terabytes of cold storage, and that's rarely getting accessed, maybe 5% will do you.
Exactly.
It depends on what you have.
It also depends number of nodes in your cluster as well. I mean, we use a lot of hybrid clusters. Just SSDs aren't that cheap still at the bottom of the world. Something about shipping or something like that. I don't know. But yeah. So I mean, we just size with slightly smaller hard drives and just more of them. And therefore, it's not a big problem to push huge throughput through those clusters, even with only 10% cache. But again, it just comes down to sizing it properly for the workload you're expecting to run, like any solution.
Exactly, and you don't want to, if you have a cluster, a workload that's going to be running 600,000 IOPS on average on your cluster, don't do hybrids. Or at least don't spec your cache drives too small. So it depends, like everybody else says. Find out what kind of workloads you're going to be running, and then go from there. So we are actually at the end of the questions here, which is really good. We are only 4 minutes over when we were 4 minutes delayed. So we are actually at 1 hour. So with that, I just want to say a wrap up. We'll do a little wrap up. So the Azure Stack HCI Slack channel, if you're not there, please join us. We are there 24/7 almost. We are represented in every time zones in the world, basically. And there's a lot of experts in there that knows a lot about Storage Spaces Direct, Hyper-V, and all the other stuff that builds Azure Stack HCI. And there's some links to the Microsoft web pages here as well. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining this webinar, and thank you to the other MVPs joining in this webinar and answering questions. I hope you all have a good day and a good evening and a good night for those that are late. So thank you, everyone, and thank you all for joining. Like I said before, this webinar is recorded and will be put up on the Festive Tech YouTube channel within a couple of days. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and I'll hopefully see you later at another event or a webinar. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
That's Vidania.
Bye.